Guys, after the last couple weekends of watching college football, I've settled on one thing, and that is the SEC title game on December 2nd between Alabama and Georgia. And what I'm about to say is a big shock. It's going to determine the national champion. Hear me out. Name two better teams in the sport right now at just dominating the second half of the football game. I mean, just absolutely sucking the life out of people in the second half. And that is the trait that over the last handful of years has won national championships for teams, whether that was the Clemson teams and what they did out in the ACC. Don't get me wrong, you have weeks where you have struggle games, Georgia, Auburn, like Alabama, Arkansas, like those games happen. But more often than not, you see the team put their foot on their opponent's throat and just squish the life out of them in the second half. And that's what Georgia and Alabama has been doing, especially after seeing what Georgia did to Ole Miss this past weekend and then what Alabama did to Tennessee and LSU. That game in Atlanta, I'm not going to lean on who I'm favoring. I'm going to save that for when we get ready to talk that game. But I really do think, barring some kind of upset in the next 2 weeks, that game is going to determine who the national champion is. Because I just think something's going to open up the path for Alabama. I really do think at the end of the day, if Oregon wins out and Bama wins out, Bama gets in. Higher strength of record, higher strength of schedule, roughly equivalent strengths of loss. So give me, that game, whoever wins in Atlanta, they're going to be the national champion at the end of the year.
I'll go ahead. The only thing I can raise you, Quinn, because I kind of agree here. The only thing I can raise you is the game at the end of the year, Ohio State, Michigan, because that's only two that I could see maybe to somehow both of those teams end up in the 14 playoff. And I will say this. Go ahead, Quinn. You got something?
I was going to say, every year, though, do we not think Ohio State or Michigan, when they get to the playoffs, they're going to be that team that can maybe win it? And then they've done it once, and it was back in 2014.
Right.
So,
right.
Heck, they barely ever win the semifinal, let alone the national championship.
Yeah, and that's the only one I can maybe think of. I don't think there's an Oregon, Washington. But I think in looking at that SEC championship game, I'll say this: it's giving a lot of. It's giving. No, it gives me a lot of 2017 vibes where I think Alabama, if they beat Georgia, I think Georgia sticks in the top four. I think it's just really hard to boot Georgia out. Definitely if Alabama at that time's around number 6, makes that jump into the top 4 at number 3 or something, then Georgia drops to 4 from number 1. Because obviously the playoff rankings are going to come out this week on Tuesday. We're recording on Sunday this week. Georgia is probably going to be has to be number 1, has to be the best team in the nation. I think if Georgia loses the SEC championship game, 3-4 Alabama, and you probably see a rematch at some point. So I'm thinking 2017 vibes. Freddie?
Wow, yeah, Quinn, I actually 100% agree with you here. I think these two teams are two of the 3 hottest teams in college football right now. But Bama's playing better than just about any other team in the country. Georgia has gotten hot as of late as well. And I think both of these teams are peaking at the right time. Oregon seems like they're still really, really good. They're still beating teams. But they don't look as dominant as they were kind of midway point of the season. Washington definitely doesn't look as dominant as they were beginning of the season, as they've narrowly escaped 2 wins in a row. Texas even not looking very promising like they had earlier in the year after they beat Alabama with a near blowing of a game against TCU last week. And then you look at, obviously, Michigan. They're cheaters, so, they're going to be rolling like they are now. I just don't think Ohio State has the offense to win a national championship. I honestly don't. I mean, I think Michigan may beat the bejesus out of Ohio State this year. I honestly do. And I don't think that game is going to be very close. I think if Alabama wins against Georgia, they will be in, barring no matter what happens. You beat the number one team in the country, who I have anticipating Georgia being the number one team in the playoff poll on Tuesday when it comes out, jumping Ohio State. What a game that's going to be, man. What a game that's going to be for the SEC championship game. It was official, obviously, on Saturday. I agree, Quint. I agree. It's going to be unreal. And I think that if Alabama does beat Georgia, they will have all the confidence in the world that they can beat anybody else in college football. And the play calling for Alabama has gotten to a point where they're utilizing all the strengths of this team, finally. Defense, the second half, playing lights out. The offense finally came around, and I think if Alabama lined up and played Texas tomorrow, then we would beat them by 17 points, personally. And I think the rest of the college football world will know that here in the next couple of weeks. And I think some of them do, but just don't want to admit it right now. But yeah, I agree.
And one last thing to add, Georgia's only gotten stronger, guys. I don't know if y'all paid attention and watched that game. Brock Bowers is back too.
It's wild.
Yeah, I was watching the game and it goes, "Oh, Brock Bowers with the block." I said, "What? Brock Bowers already back?" I thought he's
medicine, man.
Yeah. So
they didn't even announce that. Like, I did the same thing. I was watching the game and I was like, "Did somebody else wear number 19?" And I was like, "Oh my God, that's Brock Bowers."
Yeah, quick recovery. So I don't know what they shot him up with, but yeah, he's back. Go ahead.
I will say this: I don't think if Georgia loses, I don't think they get in the playoffs. And it's strictly because there's going to be so many one-loss and undefeated conference champions. And look through the history. Look through the history of the CFP. We can sit here and talk all live long day about who's the most talented rosters, who's the best teams. That has never been how it is determined. It has been determined by, do you have a conference championship? How many losses you got? That's it. Those are the two factors that matter. And you can say it's not fair, but it is. Like, it's based on results on the field, and they're trying to keep other regions interested. And the way that the game's shaping up right now, that's essentially an elimination game in Atlanta. Someone's getting in the playoffs, someone's being left out. Because if Florida State's undefeated, do you really think they're going to lose their remainder games? Like, who they got in the ACC, Louisville or North Carolina, maybe?
Yeah.
Washington or Oregon, I think the only team that's going to beat one or the other is each other. So it's either one loss or undefeated. Texas, if they win out, they're a one-loss conference champion. And I think the Big Ten champ, whether that's Ohio State or Michigan, is going to be undefeated. So it's kind of hard.
Let me just pose this to you, Quinn. If you're sitting there as a committee and you're saying, I've got one loss Oregon, one loss Texas, whatever, and a one-loss Georgia to Alabama, who is a back-to-back national champion, 13-1 on the season, I leave them out to take Texas, to take Oregon. You genuinely do that?
I think you have to. I mean, if they're both conference champions, you have to.
Because they have established over the years that they only take eye test into consideration if they view you as equals. And they have made it well determined that they do not view a non-conference champion and a conference champion as equals. So if you look through the years when Notre Dame got in as an ACC team that didn't win the conference, Georgia, Bama, and Ohio State, those are the four teams that have done it. And actually, Ohio State's done it twice.
Right.
So on those 5 occasions, there were a lot of 2-loss conference champions. That's why those teams were getting in.
Right.
In years where they are 1-loss or no-loss conference champions, if you have a loss and don't have a conference title, you're not seeing the playoffs. It happened to Georgia in 2018, if I'm not mistaken. That's what helped keep them out. So that's just the grim reality. You cannot lose in Atlanta.
Yeah.
I agree.
Great.